Welcome back to Anatomy and Physiology on Catalyst University. My name is Kevin Tokoph. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel for future videos and notifications. In this video, we're going to be discussing the Quadriceps Femoris muscle group, which are the knee extensors. We're going to be looking at their origins, insertions, innervations, and actions, and we'll hopefully be able to correlate some of the origins and insertions with some of the differences in the actions. Now, before we get into that, this is a slide from the previous video. Recall that the Quadriceps Femoris muscle group is in the anterior compartment of the thigh. So when we're looking at the quadriceps, we'd of course need to be looking at an anterior view. But also remember that both structurally and functionally, these muscles are divided from the hip adductors, which were right here, and the knee flexors, which are in the back, and those are, of course, the hamstrings. So just keep this in mind when we're going through these muscles. And we're going to neglect sartorius and iliopsoas in this video, so just cover the four major quadricep muscles. And they are rectus femoris, and then three vastus muscles, vastus intermedius, vastus lateralis, and vastus medialis. Now you could probably guess the orientation of these two muscles, but let's go and look at this figure right here and figure out where they are. So rectus femoris, this one is right in the center. And recall that rectus, when you see this term for a muscle, this implies that all the muscle fibers are going in the same direction. They're kind of all going straight. So if we look at the fibers of this muscle, they're all kind of going downwards. And so that's a clue that we've got a rectus muscle. Femoris just means it's in the femur area. Okay, so rectus femoris, right in the center. Now, if we go medial to that, over on this side, we have what is actually the largest of all four of these. This is the vastus medialis, very strong quadricep muscle. Lateral to the rectus femoris, we have this muscle over here, which is vastus lateralis. And the vastus intermedius we can't see. In order to see the vastus intermedius, or vastus intermedialis, as it's sometimes referred to, you'd actually have to remove the rectus femoris. And so the key here is the vastus intermedius is deep, specifically deep to the rectus femoris. Okay? One nice thing about all four of these muscles is they really all have the same insertion and they all have the same innervation. We'll start with the innervation, actually. They're all innervated by the femoral nerve. We actually hinted at that in the previous video. Remember I said that not only do these intermuscular septa and the deep fascia divide these into functional compartments by the muscle's action, but the tendency is also based on the nerve supply. And so the anterior compartment here tends to be supplied by the femoral nerve. And that's the case for all four of these knee extensors in the Quadriceps femoris group. So they all have innervation by the femoral nerve. Now what you'll notice here is the vastus intermedius and vastus lateralis exclusively are a knee extension. The other two are actually going to have some auxiliary functions, and those relate actually to the origins relative to the insertions. Okay? So let's look at those origins, and we're actually going to start with the vastus muscles and do rectus femoris last. There's a reason for that. So vastus intermedius, we can't obviously see it. It's deep to the rectus femoris. However, it's going to originate on the anterior femur. Okay? And its insertion, like all the others, is going to be the tibial tuberosity via the patellar ligament. Now let me explain what this means, because sometimes when you look at the insertion, sometimes you'll just see the patella, sometimes you'll see patellar ligament, sometimes patellar tendon, sometimes they'll say tibial tuberosity. Why are they all different? Well, they're all referring to the same thing. Okay, let's actually look at a lateral view of the knee right here. This would actually be the right knee, because the fibula is over here lateral to the tibia. So this is the right knee. So up here we have just generally the quadricep muscles. And here's the patella. The patella is a sesamoid bone. And the interesting thing about the patella is that it really provides sort of an indirect connection between the quadriceps and the general insertion down here, which is the tibial tuberosity. So this is where the tibial tuberosity is. Now what we have here is the quadricep muscles connect to the patella via this tendon right here, which is called the quadriceps tendon. Sometimes you'll hear this referred to as the patellar tendon. I know it says it down here, but I'll explain that in a minute. Remember that tendons, by definition, connect muscle to bone. So this would actually be technically the tendinous part up here. here's our patella. Now we have a ligament that connects the patella to the tibial tuberosity on the tibia. Now remember, ligaments are different than tendons. While tendons connect muscle to bone, ligaments connect bone to bone. So technically this region of this down here that connects the patella to the tibial tuberosity, this is actually the patellar ligament, okay? But sometimes they'll kind of just change up the terms a little bit. Sometimes they'll refer to this whole thing as the patellar tendon. Sometimes they'll call this the patellar tendon, so it gets really confusing. But basically what you need to understand is that the patella connects to the quadriceps muscles via a tendon, which technically is the quadriceps tendon or the patellar tendon. And then the patella connects to the tibial tuberosity via a ligament. And so it would be more correct to call this the patellar ligament down here. And in fact, whenever you do the patellar reflex test, where the doctor will actually hit you right below the kneecap, right below the patella with the hammer, you're actually getting struck on the patellar ligament. So even though they call it a patellar tendon reflex, you're actually getting hit on the patellar ligament. But overall, this provides a connection between the quadriceps and the tibial tuberosity. So that's why on the insertions they all say tibial tuberosity. And technically it would be because of this patellar ligament. Okay? And the other thing, you can't really see it here, but technically this is one continuous structure. Okay? It turns out that this quadriceps tendon technically envelops around the patella laterally and connects with the ligament part of this. So technically, it is one continuous structure with the patella kind of embedded within this fibrous tissue, whether it's the tendon part or the ligament part. Okay? But we're not going to get too much into the details there. Just understand that when the quadriceps contract, they pull on the insertion, which is the tibial tuberosity. Okay? And so again, for the vastus intermedius, like all four of these, the insertion is going to be down here on the tibial tuberosity. Okay? Now, vastus lateralis. This one is going to originate on the lateral femur, which makes sense. Here's our vastus lateralis over here. And so the insertion is going to be up on the lateral part of the femur. And again, it's going to insert on the tibial tuberosity just like the others. Now, when we're looking at vastus intermedius and vastus lateralis, these two muscles exclusively, their action is knee extension. Okay, that's really all they do. So for example, when you're doing the upward phase of a squat, or you're just using the simple knee extensor machine in the gym, that's using all four of these muscles, but these two are only facilitating that movement, which is knee extension. The vastus medialis actually has another function. Okay, well, first let's go over its origin. Vastus medialis is over here, so it would make sense that it originates more on the medial aspect of the femur. Okay? But it also has another origin, and it's the tendon of the adductor magnus. Okay? Adductor magnus is one of the adductor muscles, kind of on the medial aspect of the thigh, although it's a little bit more posterior. But it turns out that the vastus medialis will also have a second origin there on that muscle's tendon. Again, it inserts on the tibial tuberosity. And in addition to providing knee extension, the vastus medialis also controls the patella. What does that mean? Well, it's called patellar tracking. So it turns out that the patella can actually translocate laterally and medially over the surface of the inferior femur right here. Really, I should say the distal femur. It can kind of move back and forth. In fact, you should do this experiment. You can do this either laying on your bed or standing up. Your knee does have to be fully extended. But basically, when you're not using your quadriceps, you're not applying force, you can actually move your patella back and forth over the distal part of the femur. And you should try that. Don't use a lot of force, but you can actually move the patella back and forth. Okay? Now, the tendency for patellar tracking is that the patella has a tendency to actually move or translocate laterally. Okay? It could move medially, but the tendency is for it to actually move laterally. Well, to prevent it from moving too far laterally, one of the functions of the vastus medialis is to control the patella and preventing it from moving as far laterally. So think about the function of the vastus medialis. Okay? Its fibers are running vertically and medially. So it's going to apply a force on the patella that's more oriented in this direction. So it's going to have a horizontal medial component to its force. And so that horizontal medial component is actually going to prevent the patella from moving or translocating too far laterally. And so because the tendency of the patella is to do that, to move laterally, part of the function or action of the vastus medialis is to control that patella. All right? Now, the muscle out of these four that's the most different, and I think anyone would argue this, is the rectus femoris. It's mainly different because it has a completely different function in the hip. None of these other three do, and that has to do with the fact that the origin of the rectus femoris is not on the femur. I repeat, these other three, the vastus muscles, they all originate on the femur. Rectus femoris does not originate on the femur. In fact, its origin is the anterior inferior iliac spine, or AIIS, and the rim of the acetabulum, okay, or acetabular rim. Okay? Remember, the acetabulum is the cavity in which the head of the femur sits in the pelvis, or I should say the os coxa. Okay? And so those are two origins of the rectus femoris. So the fact that it actually exists on the hip means that it probably is going to also have some hip action. Okay? So again, it inserts on the tibial tuberosity, and so it's going to participate in knee extension, yes, but it's also going to be able to facilitate hip flexion. In other words, this hip flexion part of the rectus femoris is actually synergistic with the hip flexors iliopsoas. So the iliopsoas right here are hip flexors. And remember, this is a muscle group. It's composed of the psoas major and the iliacus. But these are going to be synergistic with that part or that function of the rectus femoris. And so this is the only one of the three that's actually going to participate in hip flexion. But understand that all four of them are going to participate in knee extension. Okay? So hopefully this video gave you a good understanding of the four major quadriceps muscles, their origins, insertions, innervations, and actions. And hopefully you understand a little bit about the patella, quadriceps tendon, and the patellar ligament, and how that relates to the insertion on the tibial tuberosity. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel for future videos and notifications. Thank you very much.